Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, and thank you for joining. It's actually 1 minute past, so I'm just going to get us going. My name is Elisabetta Baylis. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Enterprise Solutions at Hays, and I am thrilled to welcome our guest speakers today, who'll be joining me in this panel discussion, and we'll be delving into the findings of our 2024 What Workers Want report. We'll be taking questions from you, so please submit any that you may have in the chat, and we'll endeavour to get through as many as we can. Our report is based on the insights from our surveys of almost 11,900 professionals. It takes a closer look at 3 themes around the application process. What do different age groups want when they're applying for jobs? Who is using AI during the application process, and what does the future look like? What diversity data are professionals willing to part with when applying for jobs? And what are the benefits of gathering this data? We'll be going into more detail about these 3 themes over the next hour. But before we do so, I'd like to introduce our expert panel. Joining me today are Ellen Scott, Acting Digital Content Director at Stylist Magazine. Ellen is a journalist and editor, a podcaster and a writer who is deeply interested in the world of work, our relationship with our careers, and how to find contentment in this major area of our lives. We also have James Hutt, consultant at Paradigm Junction. James supports organizations in planning for the impacts of emerging technologies on their strategy and workforce. And we're also joined by Dan Robertson, who is the Global Managing Director of Fairer Consulting. Dan is an expert on workplace diversity and inclusive leadership. He supports global business leaders to transform ideas into meaningful action. Thank you all for being here with me. To help us set the theme for our discussion with the panel, I'd like to take you through some of the key findings from our 2024 What Workers Want report. First, let's chat about the impact of, let's say, a less than stellar hiring process. So picture this, you're an employer and you've got a new hire, but within that first year, they decide to pack up and leave. According to our research, this has happened to over 3/4 of employers because the individual wasn't quite the right fit for their organization. Now change that perspective and imagine that you've started a new job. You had high hopes during the application process, but the reality doesn't quite fit, doesn't quite match up. Maybe the role wasn't what you expected, and suddenly you're contemplating an early exit. This has been the case for over 2/5 of professionals, according to our research. What's the takeaway here? Well, getting your hiring process spot on is crucial to helping prevent that revolving door of staff departures within the first year. So what makes a good application process? Well, when searching for jobs, professionals today are looking beyond the job description. They're evaluating potential roles based on things like professional development opportunities, workplace culture, and a sincere dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you can see on the screen, the top considerations for applicants are visibility of the salary within the job description, proof of the investment in their personal development, and clear descriptions of an organization's products and services. Age influences these priorities. So whilst transparent salary details appeal to all age groups, visibility of career progression and development is more important to younger age groups, while those over the age of 40 may be more likely than other age groups to want the clarity on the products and services that the organization provides. Moreover, a compelling employee value proposition is increasingly pivotal in attracting applicants. It's about presenting a role that not only fits their skills, but also aligns with their career aspirations and values. Our research shows that 6 in 10 professionals won't consider working for an organization that doesn't have a clear EVP. And this is compared to 5 in 10 back in 2018. Let's take a look at the job application experience. Now, most bosses believe they're giving candidates a positive experience during the application process, yet job seekers often find themselves tangled in lengthy processes, poorly signposted application forms. These are not always optimized for mobile, and also a real lack of communication from employers. And it seems the older you get, the trickier it becomes. Nearly half of those aged over 50 have had a negative experience with online applications, compared to just over a third of those aged between 18 and 24. When it comes to keeping everyone in the loop, only 45% of employers keep applicants up to date with their application status, successful or not. This is reflected in employee views. More than 6 out of 10 candidates feel that the feedback from employers on a rejected application is poor. So let's have a look about the findings in relation to the right fit for a job. Now, a staggering 2/3 of applicants have been turned off by negative interview experiences. As you can see on the slide, the main reasons applicants are being deterred includes things like unprepared interviews, drawn out processes, or the people, the culture, or parts of the job not quite matching what was advertised. And if the first visit to the office doesn't go well, nearly half might just walk away from the application altogether. Doesn't stop there. The compliance process can be a real sticking point. Lengthy checks, unclear communication, excessive requirements. They've pushed almost a third of professionals to decline a job offer. Younger workers in particular, who are digital natives, expect a smooth and efficient process. So it's clear that both sides of the hiring table need to streamline their approach to keep up with expectations. So let's follow the process, and let's say you've had a successful interviews. Employers still risk losing out on applicants before they start their new role. Applicants are generally happy to wait between 24 hours and a week from a verbal job offer to a written confirmation. However, it's interesting to note that around a third of employees have been tempted to switch roles even after accepting an offer. Factors like better pay and benefits, flexible hours, and alignment with company values play a really significant role in their decision, and these vary according to different age groups. Additionally, nearly 20% of people have been swayed by a counter offer from their current employer. Let's delve into the use of AI and change the subject slightly, but AI in recruitment. Now, while artificial intelligence has been around for a while, it's only recently become a hot topic for the wider public. Yet currently only 4% of organizations use AI to scan CVs or evaluate applicants. However, this proportion is predicted to rise. 16% of employers foresee an increase in AI usage for recruitment, although a significant 70% remain uncertain about this prospect. Interestingly, fewer than a fifth of job seekers have harnessed AI to craft their CV. But looking ahead, more than 20% are considering using AI for their next job hunt. As you can see on the screen, AI seems to be having a part in bringing better candidates to the interview table, with over half of employers agreeing, and a further 17% have noticed poorer quality candidates making it through to interview, and 11% have noticed no difference whatsoever. However, opinions vary on whether AI tools can replace human recruiters in the initial stages of the application process. While 42% of employers believe that AI could reduce the need for recruiters to review applications, actually 30% are unsure and 28% don't see this happening. The big question when it comes to AI, transparency. Nearly all applicants, 78% actually, want to know if they are being assessed by AI when applying for jobs. Yet, our research shows that around a third of organizations do not inform applicants on the use of AI in their current recruitment processes. Now, the application process is also a really good time for employers to gather diversity data so they can progress their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and build a more diverse and inclusive workplace. However, our research shows a surprising fact, I think, that only about half of organizations ask for diversity data from job applicants. Significant majority of professionals, 8 out of 10, have expressed that they're comfortable providing diversity data during an employer's application process. Professionals are most at ease sharing data about their gender or gender identity, their ethnicity or nationality, and their age. However, individuals are less comfortable sharing information about their socioeconomic background, mental health status, and dependent status, their parent or a carer. And here's an interesting trend. Younger age groups are generally more open to providing personal diversity data compared to older generations. To encourage them to share more of their diversity data during the application process, professionals would want to see specifics around how the information will be used and be assured that it will be used responsibly. Hopefully, we've set the scene with some of the findings from our 2024 What Workers Want report. The report itself contains a lot more information, and you can access the full findings by visiting hays.co.uk What Workers Want. We'll be sharing this link with you after the webinar. Well, now I'd like to pick up with our guest speakers and get their thoughts on some of the insights we have just raised. Let me start with a couple of questions for you, Ellen, if that's okay. And we've set the scenes, and our findings have shown that more than 2 out of 5 employees are leaving a role within the first year because it didn't match their expectations. Furthermore, we've seen over 3/4 of employers say that someone has left within their first year because they weren't a good fit. So what do you think needs to change within the application processes to help avoid losing employees within their first year?
I think there is a lot to be done, and it can start with the job description. And the number one word is clarity. So I think from the get-go, including what the job will actually look like day to day. So not just the requirements or the expectations, but this is what your job will really feel and be like each day. And making it really clear what the workplace is doing to create a company culture, to create work-life balance, what flexible working actually means, because it means so many different things to different people. Having that absolute clarity from the get-go is key. And then the second thing is actually walking the walk. It doesn't do much to just do lip service to these kind of things. You need to actually be offering what you're claiming and making sure that you live up to the expectations that you've clearly set from the get-go.
Very good indeed. So clarity and walking the walk. I like that. Can I stick with you, Ellen, if you don't mind, because the next question we have is in relations to candidates wanting more than just a job description when applying for a role. They're looking for proof of investment in their personal development, information about the organization's workplace culture. So what do you think are the main areas organizations can actually showcase during the application process to get the talent that they need, and how to appeal to the more multi-generational workforce, and what should we consider?
I think there's so much more that workplaces can be doing in that job advert initial stage. Because I know in my experience, when I've applied for jobs and interviewed for jobs, the mention of real kind of lifestyle benefits don't really come up until you're already in the interview stage. But that is becoming more and more important now. People really are valuing hybrid working, work-life balance, actually having a healthy relationship with work. So I think if workplaces can emphasize that they're thinking about those things from the get-go, that's going to be hugely powerful. I think that really including the pledges that a company has made in terms of here is what we're doing to make sure that our workplace is healthy, makes everyone happy, that we actually care about your personal growth, whether that's, you know, having regular catch-ups, having salary reviews, offering certain training, but also the social side of things. I hear from a lot of people that working from home and hybrid working has left them feeling lonely and isolated and not really feeling a sense of community. So anything, it sounds kind of silly or obvious of, you know, why would we mention that we socialize in the office on a job description? But it really does make a difference to clarify we care about this. We are investing time and energy in making sure that you feel part of this group. So I think including that kind of thing in job descriptions can be hugely helpful.
Completely agree. So it's don't keep any secrets, right? Just say it.
Yeah, I think in general, if you're doing all this great work, shout about it, like show it off, get it from the get-go.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much, Helen. I wonder, James or Dan, is there anything you'd like to add to what has been discussed on those 2 points?
James, go ahead, and then maybe I'll jump in.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think it'll come back around when we talk about AI, but this conversation about being people in the workplace is really important. There's such a tendency when you have technology that is capable of doing most of a job or even all of a job to save costs and do it. But the example I always like to think about is those automated call centers where you phone and try and speak to them about how to get through. Yeah, they work great in theory, but I've yet to meet anyone who'd prefer to speak to one of those than to an actual person. So wholeheartedly agree with Ellen. Let's talk about how we're people at the workplace. Ultimately, we're all humans. We all have lives, and as technology comes in, it's going to get even more important to talk about those human interactions and what you're doing in the workplace, and that makes you valuable.
So well said. Anything else, Dan?
No, I think, and then we'll come on to it in terms of diversity, but I think the single biggest factor that we see our clients or candidates looking for is workplace culture. And that's the primary motivator. And that's fundamentally shifted from the different generations where their primary motivators were things like salary, formal benefits like, you know, pensions, things like company cars and all of that. Different generations are far less interested in that. And it's interesting in terms of our findings, actually, in terms of flexible working, you know, that 40%. And I think there's something there around the kind of post-COVID landscape that we're in, that actually people don't want to go back to this kind of classic 9 to 5 model. And so to Eleanor's point, you know, having that in job descriptions and saying, hey, listen, this is how we work, this is how we connect, this is what our corporate environment is like, I think is going to be super critical actually in terms of your ability to attract and retain candidates within that first 12 months that we talked about, stopping that revolving door.
Completely agree. Thank you very much, Dan. I'm actually going to jump on the AI point because I've got a couple of questions here for you, James. And actually, I'm going to ask you 2 questions in one. Let's go with that and see how it goes. It's still rare, we've heard from the report, companies to use AI in their hiring process. We said 4% using AI to scan CVs, but we know that number is expected to rise. So as someone who's involved in helping organizations respond to transformative digital change, how can these new technologies be implemented effectively? And what can workers do to prepare themselves for this shift in how they're actually going to be evaluated for jobs?
Wow, yeah, they're big questions, and as you say,
Sorry.
spending a lot of. I'll give it my best shot. We spend a lot of time working with companies to understand exactly how to apply this to their unique circumstances. But I think there's a few general pieces of advice for companies and for candidates that apply pretty much across the board. The first I would say is learn about this and actively dedicate time, possibly even people whose job it is, to bring information about what's changing into the organization. And there's two really big reasons why that's important to do. One of them is that the changes are quite significant when they start to take effect. So we saw the stat on the slide. It's about 3 times as many companies think that AI is improving the candidates they see as making them worse. So that's a pretty big improvement. The other stat that I found when I got a sneak peek of the report is that half of workers believe that they're being more successful in job applications when they're using AI tools. Now, this gets presented as if it's a 50-50 trade-off, but let's pause there for a minute. Half of workers are seeing a big improvement. The other half of workers aren't getting worse. They're just not the same. So ask yourself, whatever team you're in, if half of your sales force could get a productivity boost, if you're in academia, if you could have half of your research group produce better outputs, that's a massive change. So first up, this is pretty broad-based and is having quite significant productivity improvements. The second thing that I think means you should be able to build a business case to spend time learning about this is you really can't ignore it. This isn't like the arrival of the web, the arrival of emails, where you could say, oh, we're not online yet. We don't have email yet. We haven't changed our working practices yet. Because the big question with AI is not just what can you do with it, but what can everyone else do to you? And so today we're obviously talking about applicants, and you've got precisely zero control over whether applicants use AI, at least when you're asking them to do applications remotely. In person, clearly that makes a difference. But your customers have access to AI. If they want to ask you questions, if they want to make complaints, they can use AI tools to do it. Your competitors have access to it. Regulators have access to it. Your employees have access to it. And so this isn't something you can avoid. It's something you've got to face up to and engage with. So that's sort of point one, I think, is spend some time learning about it because it's not going away. Point two is then demand more of your suppliers. It kind of makes sense that if you're learning about this and you're understanding what can and can't be done, you've hopefully sent the snake oil salesman packing. But your existing suppliers should be using this to improve the quality of the service they're offering or reduce the costs. And so be demanding. We're going to talk a lot today about how this plays out in the market, but you get to play a role in that and you get to ask people for more because now it should be much quicker to draft documents or to review documents for clarity. And then the third thing I'd say is think really precisely about what you want to do as a company. And lots of big tech companies who are already on your desktop, the likes of Microsoft, the likes of Google, are doing the work of the generic tools. You don't need to build a new system to integrate with your CRM. You don't need to build a new transcription tool. What you need to think is, are you going to spend time and effort doing something that is unique to your business because you have special IP, you have special knowledge, you have particular requirements of your candidates? Beyond that, I think you should be looking for what you can take. So that's companies. I will be briefer on candidates. It was people in jobs, was it, Elizabeth, that you particularly asked about?
Yeah, job seekers. Yeah, so what can one do to prepare themselves to be evaluated by essentially by artificial intelligence?
So I think the first question that I encourage people to ask themselves is this going to affect me? The flip side of this makes quite significant productivity differences is, yeah, absolutely. If you're in a knowledge-based job, you spend a lot of time sending electronic information around, this has quite a big impact on the way you work. But if your job is about speaking to people, caring for them, if you're a social worker, if you're a builder, if you're someone who spends a lot of time moving things around the physical world, then maybe the answer is, I don't need to spend time here. But if you're someone who's working in the knowledge economy that this is going to affect, then I think upskilling yourself about how you can make yourself more productive is a really useful way to do it. And then to signal to employers who are also starting to question, well, do we need quite so many software engineers? Do we need quite so many digital marketing specialists? Signal to employers that you're able to learn, that you're keen to learn, that you're curious. I think the report shows that one of the top sought after skills these days is curiosity. It's not about being a technical expertise, about being a technical expert. It's about showing that in a world of work that is changing because there are new tools, that you're someone who can flex and adapt and respond and ask intelligent questions, rather than saying, well, this is my job when I started and I'm never going to change.
What a good point. What a lot of great points, James. Thank you very much. I'm just going to move you on to another one on this subject, if I may, because we heard that 78% of job seekers want to know if AI is actually being used when they apply for jobs. So as an employer, how can you be more transparent in letting people know?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a big part of building trust. We heard from Ellen how important that relationship is to get going, and starting out on a transparent basis is a really good way to do that and ensure you're getting in people who work like you want them to. I think first is not to treat it as something completely different. Lots of companies have been using tools that check for keywords, that throw out applications that haven't filled in all the sections for years. And so this is really a continuation of how you're talking about that. But let's say you are using new technology, particularly technologies where you think, this is still evolving. The first thing I'd say is you being honest about actually telling people something. I click through a lot of terms of service in my days and I don't read them. It's because I don't feel they're actually providing me new information. So what might an honest answer about how you're using AI look like? It would probably say something like, we think it's important to spend time with the candidates who have a real chance of getting the job. And so we're now using AI tools to filter down to a long list. We get hundreds of applications per job, and we use AI tools that check for things like completeness, spelling, punctuation, whether you've addressed our key values, whether you've been specific about us. And we then use that to create a shortlist. So what you've told people is what you're assessing. You've told them the reason why you're doing it, which is you want to spend your recruiter's time with the people with an actual chance of getting a job. And then maybe say, and this means that we share the benefits. If we're going to reject you, we're going to do it quickly, and we might even give you a reason why. You've not mentioned the company culture, you've not mentioned the values, but give people the chance to respond to the tools so they know what they're being assessed by. I think is a much more honest way of being open while still getting some of those benefits in terms of time savings.
Such a good point. Such a good point. So openness, transparency, be clear. Like it. I wonder, Ellen or Dan, would you have anything to add on this subject?
I would just add exactly what James said, spot on. I think the why of explaining why you're using AI is really crucial, because I think the initial kind of emotive reaction from applicants is, oh, so a human person isn't even going to read my application. Why should I bother? Genuinely, that's how I think people feel. So having the explanation of actually we're doing this so that we can spend time doing other things or doing the next stage of the application is really powerful, and just explaining exactly what will be done and why they're doing it is really beneficial.
Perfectly said. Dan, anything else to add?
I think AI, I mean, to James's point, I mean, in some ways it's kind of nothing new, but at the same time it's a big bang, moment, because I think as we expand into the AI universe, it's a brave new world for all of us. And I think it's exciting, but I think we need to do a bit of trial and error. There is quite some significant research that talks about how AI is quite biased in its processing. And so I think for me, there's a big red light bulb moment on how the algorithms of AI, and we've seen a lot of data, how they throw out applicants based on things like gender, or if you've had a big career gap, for example, you can't explain that properly in the application process because you're not seeing humans. So the computer says no. We also know there's some significant racial bias within AI as well. So I mean, hopefully some of that stuff might get fixed in the system once we sort out those algorithms, but I think it definitely has its place and it's efficient, as James is saying. I mean, we can't interview 1,000 people for an application, but I think at the moment there's a couple of watch outs that we just might need to be mindful of.
Very good indeed. Do you know, Dan, yeah, you make phenomenal points in regards to this, and so much talk on the subject. I think we'll be able to explore it in more depth over the coming months. But for now, I wonder if I can keep you on the subject of diversity data, actually, specifically, because there's a question in relation to, well, the report said that less than half of the organizations that responded say that they collect diversity data from candidates when they're hiring. So I wonder whether maybe you can highlight for us what are the benefits of collecting diversity data in the hiring process?
Yeah. Well, look, a couple of things. First of all, right, why are we even interested in diversity is the big question, right? Now we know the answer to that because there's a whole bunch of data that says, and we all know this anyway, when you have high levels of diversity, although this is not technically correct, it's not just about diversity, it's actually about diversity plus inclusion. But when we have high levels of difference and high levels of inclusion, we know that organizations perform better. So diversity and inclusivity are a means to an end. So what we've got to do if we want high levels of organizational performance is we've got to track the types of people that are attracted to our organizations, and we've got to track who's been shortlisted, who's being hired, etc., etc. So the benefit of that is a number, actually. One is we can see, well, actually, you know, what we find with our global clients is sometimes they actually do a brilliant job in actually attracting diverse talent based on factors like gender, ethnicity, etc. But sometimes they see a blockage at shortlisting, or sometimes they see a blockage at the hiring process. So bias actually is quite easy to detect in processes if you're tracking the data. So that's quite smart. So if you've got some data that says, hey, we know we're doing quite well in terms of talent attraction, but we've got a problem with the interview, you can focus your attention on the interview process as opposed to a broad, you know, attack on the hiring process, if you like. So that's one big thing. I think what's really interesting actually is a couple of things in terms of what the report's telling us. One is, first of all, I'm really surprised that almost half of employers are not tracking diversity data. Tracking it allows us to say, this is where we're doing great, but this is where we've got areas of underrepresentation. And just from a legal perspective, most organizations these days are doing targeted stuff. So they're doing positive action on trying to attract more women, particularly into senior leadership roles, people of color, etc. What the law actually says is, in order to do what's called positive action, you have to have evidence of underrepresentation for a period of 12 months or more. So actually you need your data in order to justify your targeted approach anyway. So that's something which is quite important to have it. I think the bigger area of focus is the candidate experience, which is, why is it that some groups or individuals are comfortable to share who they are effectively and others are not? So if we look at what the data is telling us in the report, it's saying that actually gender, people are quite happy to tick the box, whether they are male, female, transgender, and all the other different gendered categories, etc. Relatively comfortable to do that on ethnicity and age. But there's other groups where they're less comfortable. So things like mental health, care and responsibilities, etc. So the big question is, well, why is that? And now we know why it is. It's obvious. It's that people are afraid that they're going to be rejected for a job if they reveal that they have a particular mental health issue, if they've got care and responsibilities or whatever. So, and I think if you think about what that's telling us is, you've got, all of us have these invisible markers. There's stuff about us that you can't see. So for example, if you look at the four of us on this screen now, you know, we're all white individuals, but we've got lots of diversity that people just can't see. So this panel is far more diverse than we might originally make an impression of.
Yeah.
And if you apply that to that candidate experience, I think what employers have got to do is, and it goes back to that stuff about culture, is really put in their job descriptions, you know, we value diversity. You know, if you have whatever it is, whether it's mental health, care and responsibilities, come and talk to us. You know, we want you, we welcome you, we value you. So we've got to start being really proactive, because otherwise what is literally happening now, you've got individuals going through the recruitment process that are afraid that if their potential employer finds out that they have care responsibilities or a mental health issue, it's going to be detrimental to their application And that's not always the case, actually. And so what we're doing is and that will filter through, when people get jobs as well. You've probably got most employers out there have a whole bunch of people that are working for them right now that are not feeling psychologically safe. There's stuff about their identity they're just not sharing with their colleagues or their employer for fear of stigma, discrimination, etc. And of course, that's a problem, because how can you be a high performer if you're wandering around thinking, I don't want people to find out X and Y? So we know that this stuff, when we get it right, it helps individuals to be super motivated, but we know that it helps organizations to, massively perform better in the rest of it.
Yeah, so on that, Dan, what advice would you give organizations so that they can encourage applicants to actually be more open and sharing and therefore improving? What advice would you pass on?
I mean, I think, to be honest, I think some of the points are similar, I guess, around the AI point in a way, things that James has talked about and Ellen around. I think transparency is really key. And, it's the obvious human question, which is, if I share my data with you, the obvious questions are, where's that data going? Is it going to be secure? Who's going to have access to it? And all of that kind of stuff, right? And also the big question, which is, well, why? What are you doing with this stuff? There's an obvious question, which is, well, I'm applying for X job. Why do you want to know about my sexual orientation? Or why do you want to know about my, whatever? And so I think employers have got a bit of a job to do to say, this is why we want it. We want to make sure that we're a diverse employee. We want to make sure that we're not biased in our hiring process. So if you share with us, that helps us to achieve our bigger goals. And also that big question on the reassurance thing, which is, this stuff is it's secure, it's in a, metaphorical locked box, people don't have access to it. Many organizations, even the line manager doesn't see it. It sits in a secure HR system. So I think the transparency on what we're doing with it and why we want it. But I think we've got to have that messaging around the security of the data and who's seeing it. And that would give candidates more comfort that, okay, not everyone's going to know about my mental health issue or my care responsibility, or, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, Dan, I wonder if I can stay with you, because there's also a question in relation to hybrid working.
Right.
And I don't know whether this comes into this discussion or not, but the question is, how important is it to the job seeker of today?
Like literally top of the box, like so important. Like, I mean, there's probably 2 or 3 things which are almost like non-negotiable for today's workers, right? One is, which we see in the report, which is that thing about culture. People want, and Ellen's talked about this as well, but people want a value-based culture. And it's a generational thing, right, as well. So we do see that across the different ages and stuff like that. But I think the number one thing, or the number 2 thing that candidates looking for, is flexible working or hybrid working. And it is, a post-COVID scenario where we've all went into lockdown and, everyone first of all freaked out, and then we figured out, oh, actually you can do your job at home in various places and stuff like that. So, the world didn't collapse with COVID. But I think what it's created, interestingly, is a new expectation from job seekers. And I think job seekers no longer buy the argument that to be productive and have a sense of connectivity with your colleagues, that you have to be in work 5 days a week. I mean, those days are long gone. So I actually genuinely think that the organizations that will be the winners and losers of talent attraction and retention in the future will be the ones that have value, respect for difference, and whether we call it flexible or hybrid working. They're the 3 fundamental factors, which is going to drive organizational success, but also sort of candidate choices, etc.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm actually going to ask Ellen and James to comment on this, but before I do, I wonder if this agile working, hybrid working is making the sort of team fit less important. What is your view on that?
No, I don't think it's making it less important. I think it's making it more complicated.
Okay.
Because I think, and this is the funniest thing about it, I think actually what workers want is like bonding, and they want that sense of community. And I think particularly the younger generation, interestingly, they want that social experience at work and with their colleagues, but they also want high levels of workplace agility. So I think this is a real challenge actually for organizations, which is, well, how do we balance flexibility, hybrid working, and all of that, but a form of social bonding, which they want at the same time. So I think that's the tightrope which we're all working towards at the moment, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I wonder, Ellen, any thoughts on this hybrid working team?
I mean, exactly what Dan has just said, or spot on. But I would kind of add to that I think hybrid working is such a good indicator of the workplace's general values. And I think that's what applicants are looking for. So if I am applying for a job and I can see that it's a full-time office, 9 to 5, very traditional way of working, I'm seeing, okay, the way that they value me might not be based on the quality of my work or the ideas that I bring or the different ways that I work. Their judgment and valuing of me is based on how many hours I'm in the office. Is my bum in a desk chair for X hours a day? And that doesn't align with what I value with work and what I find important and what feels meaningful. So I think it's kind of using hybrid working as a bit of a barometer on what the workplace actually values and what it really cares about. Because realistically, it's not just, oh, will they let me work from home? It's, do they actually care about me as a worker beyond just being there? That's really crucial.
And trust, right? Do they trust me to be working as hard when I'm hidden away?
Yeah, exactly. I think we all just want to be treated like adults and also just like people. Like we all have different needs, and we know that we will know best how to get our best work out of ourselves. And having that kind of trust, like I've written a lot about chrono working, which is kind of working according to your personal body clock and your, different energy dips throughout the day. And that kind of thing would be immensely helpful. It's saying to people, I trust that you know how to get your best work done. You don't need to stick to a rigid schedule or be in the office 5 days a week.
Absolutely. James, any more from you?
Yeah, I thought I'd come back on the conversation about bias. And I think it's a really good moment to talk about the difference between a technology first approach or a sort of people or process first approach. And Dan's quite right that you can run tests on these models, and unfortunately, there is still bias in there that's a result of the materials they were trained on. But if you're going in and saying, hey, AI, here's the CV, should I hire this person, yes or no, then I think you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong for two reasons. One, you're going to open yourself up for bias. And two, you have legal responsibilities to be able to explain your decision-making processes where you automate them. And you just can't. And if you're doing it that way. And so I think there's a better model of how to approach this, which gets around both the bias and the explainability approach and uses your expertise in what people want. And that's to say, I can read this CV, I can read this cover letter 100 times. And the first time I can say, does it show an example of when this person has worked well in a team? Does it show an example of where they've taken the initiative and done something themselves? And all these competency-based questions that we've talked about in recruitment, you can get good evaluations of those, and then you can combine those into your hiring decision. So I think my encouragement, I'm sure we've got lots of people who work in HR or people functions on the call, would be go toe to toe with your tech colleagues. And if they bring you an all singing, all dancing system that says we can assess candidates, say, how does it work? And I guarantee they will start talking to you about black boxes and algorithms. And you say, no, I don't care about how it works technically. I care about what assessment it's using of people in my language. And so ask, is it looking for competency-based evaluations? Is it assessing their expertise? How is it doing that? And are you comfortable with the answer it's taking? Because these systems should be able to explain their work in a way that makes sense to you, given all of your expertise in hiring people who are the right fit for your organization. So demand that of the solutions, and I think you avoid a lot of the challenges of bias. The bias creeps in where you try and go in one shot and say yes or no, is this person the right fit for my organization? And that's not how you treat a new employee, and it shouldn't be how you treat a technical tool leader.
Really well said. Thank you, James. I wonder if I can stick with you, James, because there's actually a question here in relation to whether you can share some examples or real case studies of best practice for candidates to use AI in a job search and making applications. Do you have anything you can share?
Yeah, gladly. I maybe start even younger than job seekers. I had an event with an organization called 100 the other day, and who I really encourage people to look up. They take youth ambassadors who are still in school all around the world doing social change projects. And I spoke with them to basically learn what a 15 and 16-year-olds thinking about AI at the moment. And I was amazed at the response. Every single one of them had used it, but they were using tools like Grammarly to check their spelling and grammar, particularly as they were all working in a second language. They were using it as reviews of their university applications and saying, hey, here's what I've been asked. Can you please identify weak points where you think I've missed out? And so using it much more as a mentor or peer or advisor rather than an employee to do the work for you. I thought if the next generation of workers have worked this out, then maybe this is a behavior we should shed. So yeah, I think that's the tip. It's stop thinking you can outsource your work and instead think that you've got a recruitment consultant and a senior mentor sat on your shoulder and interact and ask the questions you'd ask of them. The cost of making mistakes when you've got a tool to check for them is quite a lot higher. We learned to spell correctly when the red line appeared, and now you should be able to format and write clearly and concisely, because I guarantee your competitors will be.
Absolutely. Stay with me on this one for a second, because there's a question in relation to this, which is, how do you actually filter out the example here? The question is, chat GPT answered questions. How do you know? Any tips?
So I guess I'd throw back to the questioner and say, why do you want to? These are tools that are going to be in your organization. And so if the best answer is something that someone has used with the help of ChatGPT, then maybe that's a sign that they're the type of employee who can use a tool. Now, there's a reason you might want to filter them out, which is they're pretty bland. Once you've read quite a lot of these, you start to get a feel for the tone. And it reads a bit like the tone that you get when you ask someone to write your essay for you. It's not very personal. It doesn't have a lot of character. And so, yeah, you might want to filter them out for that reason, but you'll be able to filter them out for that reason. And it's because they'll read really insipid. They'll read uninteresting. And if you're looking for employees who are specifically fit to you, then you'll see it. But the counter question is, if you've got an employee who's used this tool, you've got an applicant, sorry, who's used this tool so that they can reword, so that they can edit, so that they can check errors, and as a result, they've given you the best answer, then why are you interested in whether they've done that using tools or not? They've used the spell check in Microsoft Word, and now they're using the extra tools they've got to their advantage.
That's a really interesting perspective. Dan or Ellen, anything to add on this subject?
No, I think the main thing is, James is making some really good points, actually. We're all a bit kind of anti-AI at the moment, I suppose, but it's here. And actually, to James' point, utilize it and stuff like that. I mean, our analysts are starting to use it in the work we do with our clients there. The broader point, I think, to make actually in terms of our kind of what workers want report is around this idea of going back to the culture thing. And I think it's not just AI, but technology. I think there's one of the biggest challenges that we're finding with our clients actually is how technology as a whole is really great for us. It allows us to be agile. We can work anywhere and, stuff like that. And, we can work some days in our bedroom, some days we can work on the train, some days we can even work when we're on vacation and stuff like that, which in many ways is great. But then in some other ways, that's where we're starting to find a real downside, because what agile working is doing is giving us loads of flexibility and loads of freedom, but it's also creating burnout. And actually, we've done quite a bit of work with our clients on basically where are the boundaries and how do we get some rituals in organizations where, you know, we're not working, you know, 12 hours a day, you know, we're not. I actually spoke to a client recently and she gave me a little story where she'd get out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's a corporate lawyer. And the first thing she does when she gets out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, she goes to the bathroom. And when she goes to the bathroom, she takes her mobile phone with her. So you've got, you know, and then she works, you know, she's working. I know it's bizarre, but the thing is, she's checking her emails at like 5 in the morning while she's in the bathroom. And then she's, you know, checking emails. She's got back-to-back meetings. She's on the phone until 11 o'clock at night. And there's literally no switch off time. And I do think that some global companies now are putting in some rules around, do we send emails at the weekend? You know, those how technology is useful now, where you if you have your out of office, you know, the system deletes the email and sends a message to, hey, I'm on vacation, please resend your email, you know, when I'm back on X date and stuff like that. So I think there is something interesting around agile working and the downsides of it, but also from an inclusion perspective, that, you know, people with certain different ways of thinking or people with different responsibilities, you know, we can't all be working 7 days a week at the weekends, etc. So it's finding that balance. And I think the organizations that are going to be successful in attracting candidates are going to be ones where, as we've already said, gets their culture right. But part of getting your culture right is getting your tech and expected ways of working right as well.
Completely. Absolutely agree. I'm tempted to ask you this question, Dan, albeit it's kind of looking beyond the recruitment process itself, but just to give it a minute on what is expected from employers when it comes to DE&I beyond the recruitment process. Just give
yes, no, it's a really good question actually, and I think a lot of employers are heavy on diversity and light on inclusion. And what I mean by that is, you know, we're all focused on, you know, we need to attract more diverse candidates and more diverse talent, which we do, because diversity gives us that richness, it gives us that thinking. You know, what we've talked about is that idea of curiosity that we get with hanging out with people that are different from us. But actually, for organizations to really be successful and innovative, diversity doesn't give you anything unless you have a space which is truly inclusive, where people can come into an organization, feel psychologically safe, feel that they can be themselves. And I think a lot of the work that our clients are doing and what we're doing with our clients now is thinking about, how do you measure that? So we can measure, you know, we've talked, you know, about that diversity data, that people are relatively comfortable sharing their data on their gender, ethnicity, etc., less so on other things. But when we think about inclusion, it's like, well, that feels a bit more like nebulous. How do you measure this thing called inclusion, or how do you measure psychological safety and belonging? Well, you can measure it, and you can measure that in a very scientific way, which we do with our clients. You know, those basic things. Do you feel your voice is heard? Are you respected at work, etc.? So I think the big thing is once you get individuals into your organization, the basic question is, what do you do with them? You know, not in terms of like the work, but, you know, as in, how do you look after them? How do you make them feel that sense of well-being? And I think that does a couple of things. It stops that revolving door, you know, that we talked about earlier, but also that's where we get the experience of creative thinking, curiosity, innovation, performance, profitability, and all of that. So we're seeing a movement now, but I think most organizations are still on the high diversity, low inclusion spectrum. And I think they're just missing a trick, basically.
Such a good point. Thank you, Dan. I wonder, Ellen, are you back? And if there was anything you wanted to add.
Just sorry about my screen suddenly going. It was not letting me type, unmute myself. I could only hear and hope that you guys could see me and my sign. Apologies for that. But from what I can hear, what Dan and Josie were saying all sounded fantastic. I had nothing further to add for now.
Thank you so much. Listen, we've had 55 minutes of a very interesting discussion from my perspective. So I wonder if I could close by asking each of you to maybe give us just one thing that we can treasure, take away, and make real in our own workplaces. Ellen, is it okay if I come to you first for your gem that you're going to give us?
Oh, I feel like I have multiple, but I'll try to be brief. First of all, treat people like people, make a company culture that makes people feel valued and cared about. Two, honesty and transparency from the start of the application process all the way to when you've got someone in the business. Honesty and walking the walk is vital.
I love that. Thank you very much. James, what's your gift to us all?
So it'll very much rhyme with what Ellen said. I think it's be intentional about this. You cannot ignore the technological change that's going on out there. And the big group of people we haven't talked about yet is your employees. If you're saying nothing and if you're not being intentional about this, they will fear that they're going to be automated and replaced. And that's to cause you lots of company culture problems along the way. So be intentional. The change is going to happen, but there are the skills and the necessary information in the organization to manage it.
Love it. Dan, how about you? What are you going to leave us
Well,
with?
look, I think we're all in sync. I think being intentional and transparent is really important. And I think I think from an inclusion perspective, I think transparent about why, the conversation we had, why you're doing things like capturing data and stuff like that. But I think one of the things that I'd like organizations to start doing is drilling down, as we've already said, on inclusion, start measuring inclusion, because then you can feed that back. Once you've got data on inclusion, you can feed that back, which will help fall into your, EVP and stuff like that. The only other thing I would say, which falls from James's point, is around saying, we can, within reason, control AI. We can make it more human. So when we go to the techie people, we can say, this is what we want from it. This is how it's going to help us as human beings. So we can control the robots, if you like, to some extent. That would be my piece of advice.
You can't be calling your tech colleagues robots, Dan, but I completely agree with the point.
Okay, fair enough.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, all three of you. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, James. And thank you, Dan. Thank you also to the researchers who've produced this report, which you can see back on the screen where you can download it. Thank you also for organising this event. All that is left for me to say is thank you all for joining us. I hope you have found this discussion interesting, and I very much look forward to seeing you all again at our next event. For now, I wish you a good afternoon. All the best. See you again very soon. Thanks again.